Welcome back to Next Gen Console Watch, our show that follows all the news on the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X. I'm Damon Hatfield, and as always, I'm joined by Ryan McCaffrey, host of IGN's Xbox podcast, Podcast Unlocked.
Good to see you, Damon.
You as well. And Jonathan Dornbush, host of IGN's PlayStation podcast, Podcast Beyond.
Beyond. Hey, Damon.
Hello there. And we have a very special guest joining us this week, developer Thomas Puha from Remedy, creators of IGN's 2019 Game of the Year, Control. Thomas, thank you so much for joining us today.
I am very excited to be here. Hopefully, I'm not going to embarrass myself in such esteemed company.
Not at all. Not at all. This is going to be fun. Let's talk about Control. It's out on next-gen consoles now. Jonathan, maybe we can start with you. I believe Control actually makes use of the PlayStation 5 activity cards. Is that right?
Yeah, Thomas, I was really curious if you could talk a little bit about sort of what you and the team really wanted to do with the activity cards, because it is such a new feature, and because we're so early in the PS5's life cycle, there aren't a lot of games that I think have used them to quite this extent. I was really impressed by how deep sort of the activity cards get here.
Yeah, that was something. Well, first of all, we really like the activity cards. Like, the intent behind them is good. And when Sony disclosed the feature to us, and that was quite a while before shipping, it was a bit different then, but it was something where we're like, okay, that's interesting. Like, kind of having this ability to better show progress in the game, and maybe even hop between different activities in the game. That's cool. Visually, it looked very cool in the UI, and then it's of course the reality of like how exactly are we gonna able to support that? Because it's like, the game hasn't really been designed with the activities in mind, and at some point when we were kind of really struggling, how much resources do we have to make the PS5 version and the Series X version? We were like, they only require like one activity card, and I was like, man, you just can't ship like using one activity card. So we ended up having them for all the different missions, and of course the activities are then tied to the help system, which is of course only available on PS Plus on the other side of the card, which is a function that we also thought was really great. It's just hard to find, but of course, the designers had lots of ideas, but then there's just the reality of like, what resources do we have? And it's always difficult to sort of engineer these things into a game that didn't think about them at all in the first place. But I think we ended up having a pretty good implementation where you kind of do get a good sense of how much progress are you making in the mission. But there's definitely for the future lots of different things that you can explore, like Astro's uses activities really, really well, but that's a first party game that is supposed to have all the resources to make all those things sing. But like, when Sony presented the activity cards help and all of these things, it's like, that's maybe I didn't quite expect that from Sony. That's pretty forward thinking, and the way they sold it back then really was like, hey, like, people should hopefully be completing more single player games. Like, people just kind of give up at some point, go to their iPad or PC or whatnot to look for help and that sort of thing, and then we might have already lost you. So there's always that discussion internally then, like, that's a great feature, but that's only for one platform, and how do we kind of justify the resource use when only one system benefits?
That's interesting. I know we have data that shows that a lot of people don't finish games. So is it actually true that the activity cards are an idea by Sony to try and encourage people to finish games? Am I understanding that correctly?
I think that's part of it. And then the other part really is just, the nice sort of side thing to that is like, the trophy progress. So you can see things like, I got five things out of like 10, and that's kind of also tied into that. But the game help system, which we have in Control on PS5, but mostly thanks to Sony, it's clearly kind of thing where, we all kind of, when we play games and you get stuck, you go on YouTube and like, how do I get past this? Like in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, there's this idiotic achievement / trophy where you gotta kill 3 yellow bars or something while you're on fire. So you're watching that on your iPad, and so you get out of the sort of ecosystem, right? And with help, it's like right there on the system. And control was a good use case because, like, as we know, like, it's pretty easy to get lost in the oldest house, and that's a bit frustrating when the map system is kind of not really helping you all that much. So it's a combination of things, like in case of Control, where we have the assist mode ever since we put out the Ultimate Edition, where you can basically, make yourself immortal and have better aiming and these sorts of things. That we can definitely see a lot more people complete the games. A cynical way to look at it is like, oh, people bought it. Like, does it matter that they get through it? Of course it matters. Like, so many people worked on all this awesome content, and like, it's whenever I play like Uncharted, I'm in hour 20, I'm like, man, I hope most people get here because there's some amazing looking stuff here. So
so tell us about porting Control to next-gen consoles. Obviously, you shipped on last gen in 2019. Then when you came to work on the PS5 and Xbox Series X versions, what sort of challenges and new opportunities did those provide?
Great question. Well, the challenge is that whenever you're in this cross-generational point, to be blunt, it sucks. You gotta support the previous gen, make sure that syncs, and then whatever you kind of bring to next gen is still honestly pretty limited by the choices you made years ago for the previous generation. And it's not a very realistic thing that, well, this old game, we're just going to remake everything and then bring it to next gen. It's just not like that. That's not a reality for us, because you're literally taking away resources that are building the future games and improving the engine for the future. I mean, the games that will come out, the stuff we're working on, like, like the visual bar, you're going to be blown away. And it's, you only need to look at previous generations. Like, you look at something like Modern Warfare, I'm like, I can't understand how that game looks so good on like Xbox One and PS4. Like, it's just incredible. And you're just going to have that same on this current next generation, like we're just going to see so much improvement. So it's tricky when it's a port where you want to make sure that we take advantage of the graphics, we push the graphics, make sure that the frame rate is good. So there was a lot of sort of clear things that we absolutely need to have these. But then there's things like in Control on next gen, we were commended by, hey, the load times are so much shorter. We did nothing. We really didn't do anything. That's wow. All pure hardware grunt, and not like we're proud of that. It was just like fixing, or the load times is tied to the streaming system, how we author content and everything. Like, we're doing all of that work for like the future games, and it's just important to get that right for the stuff that ships years down the line, instead of maybe for the current games. So like, improving the load time was always on the list, but it's like, okay, what do we really need? Well, ray tracing, obviously. 60 frames, gotta have that. And then before we even can get to that, our platform engineering team needs to ensure that all the features, that there's parity. So we shipped Control back in August 2019, and then with that version of the engine, and then ever since that, there's a bunch of new things coming into the engine, like next-gen support, the new LOD system, and all of these things. So when you get to the point where, okay, like now we got to get Control running on next-gen systems on the new engine, it takes several months just to get everything working. Like, nothing works at first. Like, the content looks wrong, the textures look wrong, the lighting is busted, because we've made all of these improvements, but then they're incompatible with what we had in 2019. And so it took just months to, the game is running. Like, we had it running back summer of last year, but it's like it didn't have any of the nice things. And, artists look at it, they're like, man, we're like missing so many things. Like, the decals look wrong and all of that. I'm like, what, really? Oh, yeah, you're right. So it just took quite a while to get to that level where, okay, we have everything working that we had in the previous gen version. Now we can actually start doing all that cool next gen stuff, and of course ray tracing was the key thing, and then supporting DualSense came in a bit late, but like we got to choose our battles. Like we work on multiple games, and the tough thing in a multi-project organization is the discipline of like, we could keep developing features for this game for months, if not a year, but then you're already like screwing the next project that is expecting to get these developers to work on that game. And that's just the reality in like a multi-project organization. It's very, going a bit off topic, but it's very easy for people of why don't just hire more and more people. Well, the finances won't really work that way, right? So it's never a question of, there's always far more features and things we want to do than we actually have bandwidth, and that's just the reality of, well, not just games, but in many other things. But it was fun to bring. Well, now I can say it was fun. It was pretty painful, but to bring Control onto next gen. But like, just having that experience at 60 FPS was great, and really giving a very long answer here. But both systems, from like a tools perspective, were pretty good. I mean, Sony felt they were just a bit more ready with all of their software, so it's a bit easier to get the performance on the PS5 compared to like Series X. But like both systems, they're in their infancy. Like it's amazing that they even shipped last year under the pandemic. So it's like both systems, the amount, like all the sort of system updates and everything that will come, they're no different from getting like a graphics driver update to your RTX card. Like there's a bunch of new features, but then a bunch of performance optimization. So it's like, it's super early days.
Well, Thomas, I've been lucky enough to cover games for a long time. I'm always fascinated about how the sausage gets made, because it's just, I think most gamers just don't, it's not that they don't appreciate it, they just don't think about it. We don't see like, oh yeah, well, okay, when you bring an old game over to a new platform and you've made changes to the engine that everything breaks, and then you have to put it all back together and then make it better than that. It's crazy to me. And kind of along the lines of what you're talking about, the last question we have for you, I'm just kind of curious, in your experience and Remedy's experience with Control, were there any kind of major differences between developing Control for PS5 versus developing it for Series X? And really kind of, I'd throw the Series S in there too, because that's, certainly a wild card in the sense that there isn't a comparable thing on the Sony side for that. So I'd just be curious if you could quickly speak to the differences, if any, between the two platforms.
Oh, of course there's differences, and I talk a lot with the engineers and many team members about. I mean, ultimately both machines are like great, like they're really well built, and like I said, it's early days, so there's still a lot of just system level issues and bugs that impact performance or cause crashes and things like that. It's just that's all gonna get better. Sony kind of stuck to what worked, and their sort of development software and tools were like pretty stable and good pretty early on. And this is one of the things that people don't really see. Like all of these impact like the performance that the consumer gets. And Microsoft opted to change quite a lot of things, which on the long run are probably good. But of course, it's just a bigger hurdle for us devs early on to kind of like, we got to rewrite a bunch of different things to really take advantage of specific features. And that's not that's not like a huge negative or anything. It's just what software development is like. But maybe that explains other things. Like there's all this discussion like about teraflops, this and that. I'm just like, man, it's just numbers. Like ultimately, like the tools and everything just matters so much more, and how all of that is brought together matters so much more than just purely the numbers.
Right.
And then Series S, well, it's it's no different from like the previous generations, where like the system with the lowest specs does end up dictating a few of the things that you're going to do, because you're going to have to run on that system, right?
Yeah.
And it's very easy to say that, well, you just like lower your resolution and texture quality and off you go. it's just nowhere near that simple. Like, it sounds good when you say it, and every engine is built in a different way. It's another thing when gamers might be, like these idiots, like this game engine like does all of these things. Well, it depends on, are you making like an engine that's much more about, GPU bound or CPU bound? Like, which are you taxing a whole lot more? Well, we kind of tax kind of both, because we have a lot of physics, but then we have a lot of the ray tracing effects. But then that makes a huge difference, especially on Series S. So it's a lot more difficult to engineer an old game to make sure it works on everything. But now that we're building the future games, and hey, we know these are the system it has to run, we take that into account from day one, and we can ensure that all platforms have as good of an experience as possible. That's what needs to happen. And we appreciate that there's a lower barrier of entry for a next-gen experience, but like the more hardware you have, the more you kind of have to ultimately compromise a little bit when you are like a smaller studio like us, where we just can't spend so much time making sure that, well, all these platforms are like super good. Of course we need to do that, but there's just a difference in doing that, because it takes a huge amount of resource, not just engineering, but QA. It's a huge QA overhead to test so many different games. Like, I don't envy folks making Halo Infinite that has to ship on so many platforms. Like, they have the resources and money, but man, that's tough. Like, it's super tough to ensure everything works great. But like I said, when I talk to our engineers and designers, like, it's like the systems are solid, like, especially considering like how difficult last year was. And it's only going to get better. I mean, really, just you have some really nice looking Series X and PS5 games, but like, we're really scratching the surface, I have to say.
Sure. Well, Thomas, your insight into game development is super fascinating. I could keep the conversation going for a lot longer, but unfortunately we're running out of time. But thank you so much for stopping by Next Gen Console Watch today.
Thank you very much. It was a lot of fun. Thanks.
And viewers, if you haven't played Control, definitely check it out. It's a fantastic game, and play the next-gen version if possible. Before we go, we have the results from the poll from last episode. We asked, how do you feel about the PS5 and Series X's first 100 days on the market? And the winning answer was, how should I know? I still can't find one, with 30%. I know a lot of you are still struggling to find a new-gen console. But then also nearly 27% said you've had yours since day one, couldn't be happier, and I'm very glad for you. A new poll for you to vote on for next week. We want to know, have you used or will you use PS5's activity cards? Make sure to vote at IGN.com, and we will share the results with you next episode. And that will just about do it for this edition of Next Gen Console Watch. Thank you to both Ryan and Jonathan and our guest Thomas. We'll be back next Friday, 6 a.m. Pacific, 9 a.m. Eastern, with more PS5 and Xbox Series X news. We'll see you then.
They thought I'd never find this place, that I'd forget about him. They were wrong.